All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Kate DeConinck. I teach in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of San Diego. And along with Dr. Mike Williams, who's also on our call today, I'm also the co-director of a group and initiative that's known as the Urgent Challenges Collective. The collective is an initiative at USD that supports research, teaching, and advocacy and community engagement that is centered around homelessness and food insecurity here in San Diego. So today's event is actually the second event in our fall 2020 speaker series, and we are thrilled to see such great turnout for this conversation today. We also have a resource website full of other resources that we would encourage you to kind of check out with the Urgent Challenges Collective. We'll share that link in the chat area with you in just a couple of minutes if you want to look at some of the reports and articles and other things that we have accessible to you there. In just a minute, I'm going to turn the mic over to Judge Ramirez from the USD School of Law, who's going to introduce our speakers for today. But before we do that, I just wanted to share a couple of kind of Zoom etiquette and navigation tips to make our session today a smooth one. Okay. We have a pretty large audience. We have a few folks who will be arriving a little bit later as well, so we could have as many as 50 people at our event today. As a result, we're going to ask you to please keep your microphone muted just to avoid any distracting background noise during today's session. And also, just in order to prevent any lagging in our videos during the first part of our presentation today, we ask that you please keep your video off for the time being during the initial presentations. And then when it's time for the question and answer period, we would invite you to turn your camera on at that time if you would like to do so. Okay. After our presenters speak, we will have time for questions and answers. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, we are going to be moderating the discussion today using a shared Google Doc. So the way that you can access the Google Doc with questions for today is you can navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen. You should see a little button called chat. And if you open it up, we are going to share in the chat area right now the link to a Google Doc where you can type in any questions that you would be interested in having our speakers address for today. Okay, and we will share that link a few times throughout today's meeting, just in case you missed it or you need access to it again. So please feel free to contribute any questions there. Okay. Yeah, when you're using the navigation doc for the questions, if someone asks a question that you're already interested in that has already been posed, feel free just to put a star next to that question, and then we will know that it's a question of particular interest to many people in the audience. So Jean, I'm going to turn the floor over to you now. So you're welcome to unmute and introduce our two speakers for today, and then we'll let them kick things off from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the honor and pleasure of introducing today's panelists, the Honorable Marian F. Gaston and Steve Binder. Judge Gaston is a Superior Court judge assigned to the Juvenile Court Division and presiding over a dependency courtroom serving abused and neglected children. She also manages a collaborative court for child victims of sex trafficking who are on juvenile probation. In both courts, poverty and homelessness figure prominently. Prior to her appointment to the bench by Governor Jerry Brown in 2015, Judge Gaston graduated from the School of Law at the University of California, Berkeley, and worked as a public defender for 20 years. While representing adults, her caseload ranged from petty misdemeanors to capital murder, and she founded a specialized public defender unit focused on representing clients alleged to be sexually violent predators. During her years representing youth, she represented minors at all stages of their proceedings, including trial, and developed a special interest in the impact of early childhood trauma and fetal alcohol syndrome and related disorders. Steve Binder, who's also with us, served as a deputy public defender with the San Diego Office of the Primary Public Defender for nearly 30 years. He co-founded the Homeless Court Program in 1989 and the Veterans Treatment Court in 2011. He represented the first veteran participants to receive restorative relief under Penal Code Section 1170.9H in California. Mr. Binder has received many awards for his work. In 2009, he received the VA Secretary's Award for Achievement in Service to Homeless Veterans from Eric Shinseki in Washington, D.C. In 2013, he received the Thomas Wynn Senior Memorial Award for Lifetime Achievement from the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. And in 2018, he received the Distinguished Service Award from the Judicial Council of California, presented by Chief Justice Kanti Sakayuye. Let's see what we have here. And yes, he's the special advisor and former chair to the ABA Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. He serves on the Judicial Council, Collaborative Justice Courts Advisory Committee for the Judicial Council of California. And I turn the program over to the speakers.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Judge Gaston. And if you're listening to this, you already have some appreciation for the idea that homelessness and poverty make everything harder. It is a gross understatement to say that being homeless or poor makes everything in our society harder. Because of my experience in the juvenile justice system, both on the dependency side and the juvenile justice side, what we used to call delinquency, and because of my experience in the criminal courts, I'm going to start there, just giving an overview of how certain folks find themselves captured in the net of the juvenile justice system or the adult criminal justice system, and how being homeless or being poor makes it so much harder to get out. Then I'm going to turn things over to Steve, and he's invited to interrupt and chime in. Steve Binder was a big mentor of mine while I was at the public defender's office. He's an expert at looking at the whole person and trying to figure out what the underlying problems are and trying to actually solve those problems. And that was hugely inspirational to me during my time there. So I welcome his input throughout. And I'm hopeful that after I completely depress you with the way things work from the court side, that he'll give you some good news about some things that seem to be going right. Starting with the child welfare system. The way that our system works is that if there is suspicion that a child is abused or neglected and government intervention is deemed appropriate, if we remove a child from a parent's home, we're supposed to give them back. The underlying philosophy is that we are supposed to get the supports to the parent that they need to be that safe and loving parent that we all know that they want to be, and that they are failing to be, probably because of their own underlying trauma. And we are supposed to be giving them that hand up so they can be reunified with their child. That is the ideal. That is genuinely what we perceive as a success. That's what we want. But I want you to imagine then, so how does homelessness or poverty influence this? So I want you to imagine a scenario where two women are smoking methamphetamine in a hotel room with their children and law enforcement is called. I want you to imagine that law enforcement arrests each of these adult women and the children are removed from their mothers. I want you to imagine that one of the women, after she bails out of jail, returns to an apartment that she shares with her sister, that she calls her parents and tearfully describes the mistake that she's made, that she works part-time for a hotel chain, so she has some, not great, but enough health insurance, and she's able to quickly enroll in an inpatient drug treatment program, that her parents step up and assist with caring for the child while her dependency case is going on, that her sister assists. Let's assume that maybe even she has a car, so that when she graduates from her inpatient drug treatment program, she's able to pretty easily keep going to the outpatient portion. She can go to 12-step meetings. When her social worker calls and asks her to drug test, she can drive across town and do that random drug test. So she's able to be pretty quickly reunified with her child, and her child has spent that intervening time with family. Imagine that the other woman who was arrested in that hotel room that day had been living in a tent downtown. Imagine that she goes to jail and she's not bailed out right away, that she has to wait for a court appearance to be released. Imagine that when she gets back to her tent, her telephone has been stolen, and so she misses the phone calls from her social worker telling her that she's had a court appearance in the dependency courts. So she misses the first court appearance where everyone would be talking about next steps for this child. And so the child is placed in licensed foster care with people unknown to this mother. Let's assume that despite her best intentions, she really wants to get sober and she's referred to a program, but there's a wait list and she doesn't really have a way to get there, but she eventually does and limps along through the process. So just setting it up that way, you can see how before these cases have even really gotten underway, while technically on paper, according to the law, being homeless is not grounds for removal of a child from a parent. Homelessness would absolutely prove to be an obstacle. And how is a parent like this supposed to respond to a call to do a drug test? Even if they are clean and sober, how are they going to be able to prove it? You know, it just adds that extra level of difficulty. Another way that our juvenile court system sees children, aside from and with allegations of abuse and neglect, again, is when little people are accused of committing crimes. So again, I want you to imagine a scenario. Imagine two different, let's say 15-year-olds. Let's say that these two 15-year-olds commit the exact same crime. They commit a really expensive brand new pair of shoes from the Adidas store. And as they're running out, they realize that they're caught and they throw away the shoes. They don't want to be caught, but it's too late. They're on film or something, and a week later they're arrested at home or with their parents or at school. I want you to assume that child number one has middle class or lower middle class parents who immediately take that child back to the store where the child is made to apologize, and where the child works out a payment plan where they're going to pay back for the shoes that they threw into the dumpster. Assume that those parents tell the store that they are going to take that child's phone as punishment, that they're going to be grounded, and that the child has written a letter and that they're going to make sure that this never happens again. Assume the second child is homeless or quasi-homeless, living couch surfing or living with parents in a tent in an encampment. That there is no cell phone for the parents to take from this child. There is no payment plan that they can set up to pay back for the shoes that were thrown away in a reasonable time. With the way the juvenile justice system works, there are multiple waypoints along the way where kids cannot be brought into the system. The store could decide not to press charges. Law enforcement, lots of local law enforcement now has diversion programs where they basically decide if the parents have it under control, they don't need to forward the case to a district attorney's office. The district attorney's office who files the charges could decide this is a kid who doesn't need the supervision of the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system. Even if the district attorney files a petition, the child's attorney can ask the court not to intervene and can essentially say, these parents, they got it, okay? This is a kid who didn't do something that was that bad. We don't need court intervention in this child's life. So who's left? Who ends up actually being in the juvenile justice system? It's either the kids who've done something pretty bad, or it's the kids who've done things that frankly, all of us did, or we got close, but the court determines that there needs to be intervention in this child's life because things aren't going well. So who do we end up with? And what impact does it have to be poor or to be homeless? Moving on to the criminal justice side, let's take those two young ladies who were in the hotel room smoking methamphetamine in the beginning. Let's say that not only were their children removed, but they were charged with, let's say, possession of methamphetamine and child endangerment. Who's going to have a better time convincing a judge not to put them back in jail, not to be harsh with them? Who's going to have a better job or better chances of having their case ultimately dismissed so that they don't have a criminal record after all? So we can see, if you think about what that criminal process might look like, and that's just for any crime. And then of course, in the criminal justice system, we also have a whole list of crimes that really only apply to people who are poor, right? People don't get illegal lodging tickets if they have a house. Most of the time, people who get tickets for drinking alcohol in public are drinking in public because they don't have a private, right? Jaywalking and other types of so-called nuisance crimes are often, although they are technically on the books, equally applicable to everyone. They're enforced in such a way that they scoop up large numbers of people who are poor and homeless or semi-homeless. So we do, because of this funneling mechanism that rightfully screens out people who shouldn't be in court at all, we do end up with a high concentration of high needs people who tend to be oftentimes homeless or poor. So Steve, noting this early on, oh, you're on mute.
Steve, you're on mute. Thank you. So, Your Honor, thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everyone at USD, for putting this event together, and for those of you attending for your interest. And given the lead in here with the illegal lodging, for instance, that in many respects was part of the inspiration for Homeless Court, which was born of Stand Down, the 3-day tent city for homeless veterans that started here in San Diego. But really, it came from the frustration all the criminal justice practitioners, citizens, and businesses across the city have been grappling with for what turns out decades on end already. Because if there's somebody sleeping in a doorway, in a park, under a highway underpass, concerned citizens or businesses call the police because they don't know what else to do, and they say, solve the problem. In short, the police have two ways of addressing that. They can issue a citation or they can arrest somebody. And that puts the individual in front of the criminal justice system, where they stand in front of the judge. Were you sleeping outside without permission, without a place to stay? And while most people think of homelessness and they immediately go to mental health or substance abuse problems, poverty reigns supreme across the board because people can't afford to live anywhere but the streets. So the things that you and I do in the privacy of our homes, as pointed out earlier, drinking, using the bathroom, sleeping, people who are homeless have to live in public, have to conduct those behaviors in public. And so going in front of the criminal justice system, the individual has a right to challenge the offense and go to trial, and defense attorneys will do their best to raise a defense. But it takes time, not just to appear in court for one hearing, for multiple hearings to lead up to that trial. And the individual who is homeless often is facing that daily struggle for food, clothing, and shelter. And so they end up pleading guilty to a particular offense. And illegal lodging is supposed to essentially identify the wrong, and the punishment that the court sentences the individual to, be it volunteer work, public work service, fine, or custody, is supposed to solve that problem. But an individual who can't afford to pay for lodging isn't going to be able to pay for the fine. And an individual who is incarcerated for not having a place to sleep is literally released to the streets and is homeless again, therein frustrating our citizens, our police, and our judges and prosecutors who are like, we told you not to do this anymore. Why are you back here? So they increase the fine, they increase the jail sentence for the second, third, fourth, fifth offense, because it's not uncommon, it's quite common, in fact, that people receive multiple charges, multiple cases for conducting the same behavior, because candidly, it's survival of the fittest to try to get into some of the programs because the waiting lists are so long. The short answer was homeless court. And it was because of the frustration that criminal justice practitioners were facing that we drew inspiration from the Vietnam veterans of San Diego, who essentially were talking about Stand Down and said, our veterans, 116 of 500 homeless veterans filled out a VA survey, and they said they needed help with outstanding warrants. That was 1 in 5 homeless veterans. That was more than double the request for any other service that was listed. And we took that statistic to the presiding judge, who very politely said, come on in, we'll take care of these veterans. And we politely explained to the judge, nothing personal, Your Honor. They don't trust the courts. They're not going to come in because they will be hit with these fines and threatened with custody. And it will just push them further outside of our community. We suggested going to Stand Down and literally holding court on a handball court and utilizing the services that were on site, whether it was going to the VA and linking up with the Employment Development Department or any of the other homeless service agencies that were on site things people did to reclaim their lives, that would satisfy the court. Essentially a different currency. Their hard work in engaging in these programs and following through would satisfy the fines and the custody requirements. And the prosecution realized that the vast majority of offenses that people received in homelessness were public nuisance offenses. So they also realized that the more serious offenses, theft might prevent, pleading guilty to a theft would prevent them from gaining employment, that a plea to under the influence of a controlled substance, which was a 90-day mandatory sentence of custody, would, again, not address their substance abuse, or more commonly, the mental health problems that they were trying to mask or deal with because they didn't have access to mental health services. The first person stood in front of the court, presented, this is that stand down, we counseled individuals with their cases, we helped link them with the services on site, and we presented the individuals to the court with proof of their engagement, and the court would review the cases, the plea bargain, and give them credit for time served for their participation in stand down to resolve their cases. It helped build confidence in the court, and it helped people to understand that their voluntary participation at stand down, their engagement with the services on site, was just as important to the community at large as it was to the individual or the service provider that they were working with. In time, we built that, and we transferred the stand down homeless court sessions to the Women's Resource Fair for homeless and battered women, because they too were in need. And some 4 or 5 years later, St. Vincent de Paul Village, now Father Joe's Village, asked that we apply the same mechanisms of homeless court for the participants of the cold weather shelter, and eventually for their facility, that it became a monthly court session that grew to what is currently some 60 homeless service agencies across San Diego County that refer participants into court, the homeless court that is. But I'm going to back up and explain the monthly calendar, because the stand down homeless court is an engagement court where people voluntarily show up and they participate in the 3 days there. The monthly homeless court is a referral from homeless service agencies where each agency essentially has a different target population. Some deal with homeless and battered women. Some deal with youth. There are veterans. There are people who are engaged in substance abuse programs, job training programs, mental health services. There's no one way in and out of homelessness. There are a myriad of causes and challenges that people face. And the court recognizes there is no one solution to getting people off the streets. They're happy to recognize efforts people have made to overcome the challenges of living on the streets, the trauma that has infested their lives, and efforts they've made to reclaim their lives. So there are some programs, let me stop. Each program has a certain criteria you have to meet for them to refer you to homeless court. Some programs, it may be a phase 1, or another program, it may be a number of classes. But everyone has a knowing and thoughtful referral because they've accomplished something. They've taken strides to put their past behind them. You can't just knock on the door and say, I want to go to homeless court. You have to accomplish something and have proof of those accomplishments in hand with an advocacy letter, certificates, or meeting slips to present to the court. So those referrals are made to the public defender's office. The public defender essentially surrenders the individual to the court, sending a list of the individuals, their date of birth, and other pertinent information to the court and the prosecution so they can prepare a calendar. And they can prepare a list of cases as well as a disposition with notes of their concerns, if any. The public defender meets with the clients at the host shelter, either Father Joe's Village or Veterans Village of San Diego, 1 week prior to the court hearing. In many respects, it's to get the individual comfortable with this room, a community room, is where we're holding court. But it's also indicating to those individuals and the community at large is that these programs, the programs that referred you in and the ones that are hosting our court session, are where success happens, where you can reclaim your life. Yes, you can always go to the court, and the court will have, shall we say, prescribed or a set of sentences, but those sentences usually come back to fines, volunteer work, public work service, and custody. It is the court's recognition of people's accomplishments in life skill activities, in computer literacy, resume building, job searching, as well as taking care of their physical and mental health needs that go into the mix of the court's sentence, which is essentially recognizing their accomplishments, things that people have already brought to the table. And so if you think of the entry criteria, the basic level of accomplishments an individual has to meet before they're referred, it's sometimes 30 days, 90 days. Candidly, on average, it's over 250 days that people are in their program before they step out to seek that referral, because they want to make sure that what they've accomplished is significant enough that the court will recognize them, because they realize what precious little they have gained in their program may not be enough for a court. And they're never really sure that they will be received with open arms or recognized for who they are. But because we have more than 30 years experience behind us, the court and the programs, the prosecution and defense included, have come to work together, build this program, the trust as well as the framework to recognize people's accomplishments, understand that they've overcome some serious challenges, and help them move forward. And so we deal with, yes, mostly public nuisance offenses, but we do not shy away from, we deal with the petty thefts. We deal with under the influence, batteries, as well as resisting arrest, though they're few between. They're not that many on the table, as well as DUIs. The important part to realize is we need to meet the challenge our participants face just as we're asking them to meet their challenges, and that people can transform their lives. So I'll give you an example of one individual before I retired who presented to a homeless court just before I retired. He had gone into a convenience store 30 days on end, went to the refrigerator, took out some alcohol, walked out the door, didn't pay for it. It wasn't until he got physical that they decided to call law enforcement. When I sat and discussed the prosecution's discovery, I reviewed it with him, talked to him about what he had accomplished in his program, his sobriety, and other activities. He turned to me, he said, candidly, I'm horrified by my behaviors. I don't remember anything that you're talking about here, but I don't deny it either. I was blacked out. I don't recall. And so we talked about his case, and he ended up going back to the convenience store to make amends. He said, I will stock shelves, I'll sweep your floor, I'll pick up garbage, I'll do something, anything to try to set things right with you. I don't have the money to pay for what I stole, but I'm truly sorry for what I did. They gathered around one by one saying, we don't want anything from you. We realized at the time you were in great pain. You were having a terrible time. We're just happy to see you in better shape. They pulled the manager out. They pulled the pharmacist out, the cashier. They shook hands with him. They talked to him. The prosecution sent their investigator out to verify that this was in fact what happened, and they ended up dismissing the case. And this structure that we call homeless court, be it at stand down, the monthly homeless court, or as many sometimes conflate and they say veterans treatment court too, but that's a different setting. It is essentially saying that we're having this dialogue. We don't want these behaviors. We don't want people, whether it's jaywalking, illegal lodging, hitting someone, or using substances, but we have to help guide them to better days. And sad to say, given these current circumstances, it's even tougher middle class folks to maintain their apartments, to maintain employment. We've learned this through COVID, that we are all interrelated. And we are fortunate, we are blessed in San Diego. We have a great many services to help folks to better days. The sad reality is there still aren't enough out there. And that even when these services are provided, when people complete their programs, sad to say, it's hard to get a rental, a housing. It's hard to get employment and launch from those programs to really live full, meaningful lives. But people are trying all the time. And if it weren't for the collaboration of our criminal justice practitioners, from the court clerks, the prosecution, defense, and the judges, the number of people on the streets, I'm sorry, I almost forgot the treatment providers. They're the vital component that makes homeless court work. That if it wasn't for them, our streets would be all the more strained. Our police would be, shall we say, pulling their hair out, because they could keep citing or arresting people, but they can't solve the problem. So the other half of this is we've had other serious people come through. One gentleman who had over $20,000 in fines and fees for riding the trolley. And when we received his cases, and that's all he had, he took up a number of pages on the calendar. The provider was just aghast. It's like, I'm not sure this individual has done so much to warrant setting aside $20,000 plus of fines and fees. But we sat down with the individual and we broke it down. It was for want of $2.50 that person ended up with $500 fines and fees, because the civil assessment is attached to it, that that number was so large. When we found out why that individual was riding the trolley without fare, it was because they couldn't obtain a disabled pass. That person wanted to get out of the stressful situation of downtown, where there were drugs and other influences that were just too much to bear. And in fact, this individual did not have any other substance abuse or other offenses, and now had a trolley pass. And given the totality of the circumstances, we were able to resolve that individual's matter with proof of what they'd accomplished in their program. So there are lives that are being transformed every day through the programs and through the collaboration of the court. And I'm going to talk now more seriously on the Veterans Treatment Court, because candidly, if folks aren't given the opportunity to redeem their lives through program activities, even those who are housed will end up homeless for having a conviction and for having been through the criminal justice system. And so there was one gentleman with a particularly heinous offense. He had done he inflicted some $10,000 in medical bills on the pizza guy. And he had successfully completed his treatment program through Veterans Village of San Diego. He was sober. He'd gone through anger management classes. He'd done everything right. He'd helped overcome or deal with, more appropriately, deal with his post-traumatic stress. And he was presenting his restorative relief motion to the judge. The pizza guy showed up at the hearing was like, I'm really concerned about what's going on here. How did we get to this point? My client turned to the pizza guy, explained to him that he was just feeling a world of pain having come back from battle, that he wanted somebody else to feel that pain. And that he went off on the pizza guy, causing, again, severe injuries and medical bills. Apologized to him profusely. He's like, I wanted somebody to feel that pain. Unfortunately, it was you. You did nothing to deserve this. And he apologized to him. The pizza guy said, but I need my medical bills taken care of. And my client turned to him and said, I sold my Harley. Your $10,000 is waiting in the court, revenue and recovery. It's yours today. And again, because we were able to have that discussion of a victim who didn't know what had happened to him or his place in that particular offense, and a defendant, my client, who had gone through a treatment program and was able to overcome his trauma and deal with life in peaceful terms, that we were able to essentially effectuate public safety that we all desire, while gaining personal safety for the individual who was struggling on the streets. Essentially coming to the desires we all have when we call on people to live law-abiding lives and when we call on law enforcement. But we're able to do that, because of our programs and the collaboration with the criminal justice system. There's the short answer. Any questions so far?
Yeah, we actually have. Thank you, Steve, for that. And thank you, Judge Gaston. My name is Mike Williams. I teach in the political science department here at USD, and I'm the co-director with Kate with the Urgent Challenges Collective. I just want to acknowledge as we go into Q&A that we have on this call a wide variety of folks from USD. We have undergraduate students, we have law students, we have community partners, we have individuals with lived experience on the call with us. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm gonna go to our Google Sheet, and the question that seemed to get the most asterisk right now is to have you talk about the Martin v. Boise decision and address how you think local governments and policymakers should respond to that order from the Ninth Circuit. So maybe you could explain what that ruling was about, and then someone just wanted some comments on how we're supposed to be responding as a local community.
You want me to take that one, Steve?
Go for it. You can start.
All right, so the Boise case was a Ninth Circuit case that essentially said that you can't criminalize behavior that people can't avoid doing. That if there's no alternative, then you can't criminalize sleeping in public. So a couple of things about that. First of all, we already had something similar in California. There was the case of N. Ray Eichhorn from 1998, where interestingly, it was actually a veteran, a military, Marine veteran, who had moved home, I want to say it was to Orange County, and was sleeping near their civic center because that's where restrooms were and that kind of thing. And it was less dangerous than some of the other places that homeless people could go and not be ticketed. He didn't want to be there. And anyway, his defense attorney wanted to argue that he had no choice, essentially, what's called in defense law, the necessity defense. So it's an affirmative defense. It says, yes, I did this thing that's prohibited under the law, but I had no choice. And the trial court back then did not allow him that defense and said, no, this doesn't rise to the level of a necessity defense, and the appellate courts disagreed. And so in California, at least since 1998, the criminal defendant has been able to argue, if there's not sufficient shelter, I had to sleep outside. This should not be criminalized. There are a couple of problems with that, and as a relief mechanism. One is that, as Steve was pointing out, oftentimes we have folks who've got not one ticket, but let's say 15. And once someone gets to that point, some judges are reluctant to release people on their own recognizance. So yes, you have the right to trial, but you also may have to stay in custody while you're waiting for that trial. So many people would choose to plead guilty to get out and just get a fine rather than exercising their right to a speedy trial, even if there was a pretty good chance that they were going to win at trial. Another problem with it is that if illegal lodging becomes something that law enforcement decides can't be enforced, there are other things that people can be ticketed for, right? It can be blocking the sidewalk. It can be urinating in public. And so there are these other types of offenses that still work. So while I do think it's heartening to see our appellate courts, including the Ninth Circuit, recognizing that sleep is a biological need. That is the foundation for these decisions, is that it is a human need to sleep, and we have to do it somewhere. And if we live in a society that's chosen not to make sure that shelter is available to everyone, then we as a society have to just live with the fact that there are people who are sleeping outside. I mean, I think it is good that people are articulating that, but we don't have enough housing. I mean, the bottom line is we don't have enough places for people to stay. So it's one thing to say, hey, great news, this can't be penalized, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is that as a community, we have decided that we're okay with thousands of our brothers and sisters sleeping outside. So I guess I'm sounding cynical today, but I you know, it's a good win, I guess, but it doesn't really solve the problem.
No, I think that's wonderful that you articulated how narrow in a lot of ways the Boise decision is, because if it just covers sleeping and it doesn't cover blocking a sidewalk, then how much of a defense is it really? Steve, did you want to add anything to this case?
To follow up on that, and I don't think it's cynical so much as the reality of where we are. We are calling upon the police and the courts to solve problems that are really social problems. And it is because, I mean, a large percentage of the homeless population are working.
Yeah.
They're working numerous jobs. And some people don't have transportation. I was astounded to learn, and this was deep in my career with homeless court, that people had so many cases for driving on a suspended license because they knew they were going to lose their car, and they would buy some junk car that would spew pollution. It would be have cracked windshields, and they were bound to be stopped or their car was going to break down. But that was the cost of poverty. They couldn't afford a better car. And because of that, they accepted the convictions. They just let the cases continue to pile up, and they would lose one car after another, and they'd spend time in custody or pay fines or drive on a suspended license essentially for their lives. The short answer is the courts and the police are not going to solve that problem. It is really our homeless service agencies, our community at large, has to provide the opportunities for people to live law-abiding lives. And when people are working full-time and they can't afford a place to live, they're going to live outside the law. But while that's cynical, that's part of why I turn to those inspirational cases that happens every monthly calendar, happens in every veterans treatment court, happens at stand down time and time again, that people are trying and they're making a significant effort. And while, yes, people will come back, they will continue to make that effort. I'm going to go on to one quick story, and I'll try to keep it short. There was a gentleman that came to stand down. He had some 25 cases. Let's just say he wasn't putting his best foot forward, so we held him to the end of the calendar. He had engaged in services. The judge said, next time you ride the trolley, pay. And this is after he presented his proof and the judge pronounced sentence. He said, pay. My client turned around and said, or don't get caught. And yes, we're all slapping our foreheads. The judge said, didn't take it personally. He said, court adjourned. And then he waved the gentleman up. He says, the reason we tell you that is because we want you to live lawfully and not have to be imposed with court proceedings as much as you want to live lawfully and not be imposed. So the next year, the guy comes back. He's at stand down again. He engaged in more services. He's presenting a lot better, and he only had 5 cases. The judge pronounced a sentence. The gentleman says, Your Honor, I don't know if you remember me. And we're like, everybody remembered you. He says, I behaved badly last time. I know I was disrespectful to the court. The 3rd year he comes back to stand down. He comes to court. He doesn't have any cases. He says, Your Honor, I just want to thank you for being understanding and working with me in my difficult times. I'm doing better now. I don't have any cases. I just wanted to show my appreciation. People are really trying hard. And I say this to our governments, our courts, our prosecutors, those that we are even, shall we say, challenged with at times. It's just they're trying with what limited circumstances they have. And we've seen our nation grapple with a number of different solutions to homelessness or efforts, whether it's the 10-year plan, the 100,000 homes, the Housing First harm reduction. They're all mindful. We're making tremendous strides, but we need employment. We need more housing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. And I just want to Judge Gaston that you have about 7 minutes left until you have to head off and go back to court. So I just want to acknowledge that we know you're on that time. Here's another question that we have in the Q&A. I'm gonna slightly kind of change it a little bit. The question is kind of about the use of the justice system in San Diego to address issues of homelessness or poverty. And the question is, how does San Diego compare to other cities? And I would just add to that, and/or how has it changed over time in terms of using the justice system as a way to address these issues? Has it gotten something that happens more often, less often, and how do we compare to other cities? I hope that makes sense. Judge Gaston, you want to give it a...
I think on our health and human services side, I think we have pretty robust services, particularly on the child welfare side. You know, the scenario I was describing where a young mother is smoking methamphetamine and we've removed her children. We actually do a pretty good job, I think, compared not only to other counties throughout the state, but to other states throughout the country. My frustration, my entire adult life in San Diego has been that we have this siloing. We separate public health from public safety. So we pretend as though over here on this side, we have people who are struggling with homelessness and addiction and physical problems and unresolved childhood trauma and psychological issues. We put them in this side. And then over here, we have people who are a threat to public safety. And we're pretty dishonest about the fact that on the Venn diagram, there's this massive overlap. And that what the folks on the criminal justice side need is the same stuff that the folks on the health and human services side need. And so I do think that that conversation has become better in the last even 10 years. There's more and more of an acknowledgement of that. I think our governor is very sensitive to this. You know, he's appointed a surgeon general, a pediatrician whose entire, really her cause is early childhood trauma and the impact of that on adult symptoms, physical symptoms, but that includes a lot of symptomology that we criminalize, right? So if someone is very, very impulsive as a young adult and gets in fights, we criminalize that. If someone is very anxious and they medicate with methamphetamine, which of course was originally used as an antidepressant, we criminalize that. So we have the structure in place now, I think, to at least acknowledge that oftentimes what we are addressing as crime is a public health problem. So we'll see. And I think we're at the very beginning stages of figuring out how to operationalize that. What does that mean in terms of, do we still send people to jail? How do we change things? So I think there's a lot going on in this area.
Thank you, Steve. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
If I might add on that, it is that when the homeless court started at Stand Down in 1989, it was literally the first collaborative justice problem-solving court in the nation. Later that year, drug court started in Florida. We had no idea each other was at work. It is the understanding at that time that what the traditional court was doing wasn't working for anyone. and both have become inspiration. But it goes back to what we find at Stand Down. Our Vietnam veterans came back to a nation that didn't understand or appreciate the circumstances and the trauma that they had. We didn't even have a name for post-traumatic stress at the time. And there was a group in San Diego that literally wanted to take action on the VA. A chaplain gathered them around and said, you have every right to be frustrated and angry, but you could build something instead of destroy something. And they literally built Veterans Village of San Diego. They built Stand Down. They built Swords to Plowshares up in San Francisco, US Vets in LA and across the nation. And so there are these solutions out there. And our Vietnam veterans that came back, shall we say, rough around the edges, again, before we knew what post-traumatic stress are now leaders in our community. Just as our individuals who are living on the streets and are showing up in our criminal justice system, having a tough time living on the streets, they too will be our leaders in the community, given the opportunity. That when we can, our agencies, our institutions, government isn't working, we have to adapt and make them work.
Thank you both for that. I think I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question before you leave, Judge Gaston, and that is, we have a lot of students on in this Zoom room with us, and there's a question about how students or members of the community can be more involved in the work that you're doing and the work that Steve's doing.
All right, I'll let Steve talk to them a little bit about homelessness specific outreach opportunities, because there are quite a number. But I will use this as an opportunity to plug being a CASA. If you've ever heard of court-appointed special advocates, they advertise on NPR and variety of places. These are people who are paired up with a child who's in the foster care system, and they just help that person kind of keep on track. They're the one person in that kid's life who's not paid. It's an entirely volunteer organization. And sometimes we have kids who've been in the system for years and years and years. Their attorney has changed, their social worker has changed, their judge has changed, but their CASA is someone who's been with them for years. And we know from research that having that one person in your life can make the difference between someone becoming homeless and not becoming homeless. It can make the difference between someone being suicidal and not suicidal. It's showing up for somebody. And it's a pretty minimal time commitment. I think it's fewer than 10 hours a month. There's a very rigorous training program because they don't want nuts doing it. But it's a fantastic program. And as part of your job as a CASA, you write reports for the court. We judges rely very, very heavily on those reports to tell us what's going on with the child. And you can come to court and advocate for that child's needs. So unfortunately, I have to get back into court, but I think the CASA program is phenomenal. And if anybody has any questions about how to get involved, it's Voices for Children, the CASA program here in San Diego, or if anyone wants to email me directly, I'll put you in touch. So thank you for inviting me today. I have to go work, sadly.
Thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful.
Right,
we really appreciate it. Steve, are there ways that members of the community can be involved with the work you're doing as well?
And so anyone who's on this, who is going to law school, for instance, can apply to the public defender's office, prosecution, either city attorney or district attorney, to engage with the criminal justice system there. There are homeless service agencies across the county that are desperately in need of staff. As pressing as the homeless crisis is across this nation, sadly, the agencies that are at bat aren't getting enough money to meet their needs or the needs of the people they serve. And so it is in part letting your government officials know that you're concerned. It is in part offering your time and services to the agencies at hand. And one of the prime examples is Stand Down, which unfortunately is not happening as a 3-day event this year. But one of the indications, levels of success that I've always drawn inspiration from is that 1,000 homeless participants voluntarily show up on San Diego High School's athletic field every year when they could stay in whatever park or highway underpass they're living, and 3,000 or more than 3,000 people across San Diego volunteer to go provide services there when they could easily, well, and on better days, go to the movies or stay home with their loved ones, sit on the couch and watch a movie. But essentially both are signaling, housed and those who are seeking housing, that they want something better. And the more that we send that signal out, the more we can direct our attention away from the calling of police or utilizing the criminal justice system to try to solve, again, the social problem.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been such an important event, and we collaborated a lot with the School of Law at USD, but we see a lot of other folks on the call. Jean and Steve, thank you so much for your time. And we're going to be following up with resources and materials for you for today, so you can see those. Also, anyone on this call, we would love to get your feedback on this event. So you can see that there's a form there that Kate just put in the Google chat. If you could fill out that form, let us know how this went today for you. That'd be wonderful. And next week, we are going to be having Homelessness Action Week at USD. It's going to be all virtual, but we have some other wonderful speakers lined up. We have a couple of days where we're going to provide opportunities for students and faculty and staff to learn about our community partners and what they're doing to address homelessness. So you can see all of our activities. I'm not sure if, Kate, can you put that in the chat for us? And then Kate, is there anything else that you'd like to say or we'd like to say before we say goodbye?
No, I think that was great. This was such a meaningful conversation today, and I'm grateful for our presenters, to Jean and the School of Law for supporting this and helping organize. And yeah, you know, for those of you who are really looking for ways to get involved, please feel free to reach out to myself or Dr. Williams at the Urgent Challenges Collective, because we have research, teaching, all sorts of different projects that we can kind of loop you in on if this is something that you're feeling passionate about, including volunteer work too. So please do take a minute just to fill out the survey to give us a little feedback about today's session. And yeah, wishing you all well. Thank you all for being here today.